Could LSU's most important addition already be on the team? It's Locked on LSU. Here we go.
You are Locked on LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Okay, let's get it. It is Locked on LSU, your team every day. I'm your host, Matt Moscona. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. We are free, available wherever you get podcasts. Of course, on YouTube as well, so please subscribe. As always, one of the fastest ways to help us grow is by leaving your comments below. So thank you sincerely for that. LSU opens fall camp on Wednesday. I have 4 fall camp storylines that I will be watching. We do have media availability on Wednesday, so I'll give you a full practice report as soon as camp is done. So make sure you're subscribed to the podcast for those camp reports all throughout fall camp, with Brian Kelly giving us a ton of access. But I'm going to get to those 4 camp storylines here in a smidge. But on Tuesday, we are officially into watch list season. And if you're an everydayer, you've probably heard me talk about this before, but my feeling on watch lists is it's actually a greater indictment on your program if you don't have a player on a certain watch list than it is a compliment having them on, because basically every watch list puts out 40, 50, 60 names. So, for example, if it's like the Mackey Award, which goes to the best tight end, if your guy isn't on that list, you're in trouble because you don't have one of the top like 40, 50 tight ends in the country. So I don't make too much of preseason watch lists. It's fodder and it's conversation starters. But the Nagurski watch list was released on Tuesday, which goes to the best defensive player in the country. Glenn Dorsey won the Nagurski back in 2007, LSU's only winner. And Whit Weeks was on the list. And he should be. Whit Weeks was number 2 in the SEC in tackles a season ago. He was number 9 in the country in tackles a season ago with 125. I've used this statistic before. That's more than what Devin White had in his Butkus Award-winning season. Weeks' PFF grade was a 71.7 last year. Basically, Whit Weeks and Anthony Hill Jr. from Texas are 1-2, 2-1, 1A, 1B best linebackers in the SEC, and therefore they're in the conversation for the best linebackers in the country. Both have a great shot at being first-round draft picks in next spring's NFL draft. So, of course, Whit Weeks should be on that list. I have no problem. But a guy who was on the list a year ago that wasn't on it this year is Harold Perkins Jr. And for all the conversation that we've had about the transfer additions on the defensive side of the ball at every level and how those guys are expected to impact this defense, maybe the best addition for LSU that we have not spent a lot of time talking about is Perkins. And if he has the type of season he's capable of having, he could find his name on this list at the end of the season. I mean, in 2022, Harold Perkins exploded on the scene. He was a freshman All-American, and he was first-team All-SEC. Not freshman All-SEC. He was first-team All-SEC as a freshman. In 2023, he was second-team All-SEC, basically mirrored his production from his freshman season. That was just an atrocious LSU defense in 2023, the worst in program history. And then in 2024, of course, going into the season, LSU had a new defensive coordinator in Blake Baker, and they were trying to figure out, what to do with Blake Baker, with Harold Perkins. And remember, Perkins has been such a hot button issue because he had such a dominant freshman season in 2022, and then going into 23, they wanted to make him an off-the-ball linebacker, and that was just a disaster. And shortly thereafter, they ended up moving him back to that sort of Sam linebacker role. And he thrived, and his production was there, but again, it was a bad defense. And then they go into 2024, and Blake Baker's there, and he wants to try becoming an off-ball linebacker again. And all the conversation was, well, look what Blake Baker did with Damone Clark and making him an All-American caliber linebacker. And this is what Blake Baker said last spring of 2024, about Perkins moving off the ball.
We're going to find out what he does best. He can play inside linebacker. He's grown exponentially, and it's hot in here.
the alarm was not a sound effect. That actually happened. As how fitting, as Blake Baker is saying to the media, he can play, Harold Perkins can play inside linebacker, and alarm sounds. It was like the real life BS meter was going off when Blake Baker said that. Because I can understand, again, why Perkins wanted to play off the ball. And we've had this conversation before. He was trying to prove to the NFL he could be a 3-down linebacker. But remember what Blake Baker also said last spring of 2024, with how they plan to use Harold Perkins.
I think you can use Harold in a variety of different ways. I think we have to start him somewhere and get him really good at that. But he's so explosive. He's got an innate ability to really turn the edge. He's a really good blitzer, as we're finding out this spring on the inside. He's really good in coverage. So there's not much the guy can't do. We just can't overload him with all that right now. We're going to find ways to utilize his skill set best and hopefully put him on their worst player every single week. So we have a lot of big plans for him, but we gotta crawl before we walk. But proud of him. He's done a really, really good job for us this far.
That was last spring. All the different ways they plan to use him, inside, outside. We're going to find a way to match him up on the opponent's worst player to create a mismatch. And you only got 3 games out of Harold Perkins. He unfortunately tore his ACL in that game against UCLA, was lost for the season. And Harold Perkins has kind of been out of sight, out of mind. I mean, when you consider after the dominant freshman season, then all the conversation before his sophomore year was about him moving off the ball. And then it went the way it did. Then all the conversation before his junior year was, again, how would Blake Baker use him? Were they going to try him off the ball again? Was he going to play in a more natural position? Remember, Harold Perkins went to SEC Media Days last year. He was the preseason SEC Defensive Player of the Year before 2024. There was so much talk and hype and expectation around Harold Perkins, and he wore the number 7 jersey along with Will Campbell. There was all this conversation, and then the injury happened. LSU goes about the season without Perkins. He was still rehabbing, didn't go through spring, obviously didn't make the trip to SEC Media Days. So it's just been very quiet around Harold Perkins. And maybe that's a good thing, because we've talked so much about the transfer ads at every level of the defense. And maybe, just maybe, Perkins at his best is going to be the most impactful addition on this defense. I want to remind you, if Harold Perkins does in fact return to form at the star position where Blake Baker has said Perkins is going to play, it's a massive upgrade. I do not mean this in any way to be insulting to Major Burns, but Major Burns last year was your biggest liability defensively. Major Burns' defensive grade on Pro Football Focus was a 57.5. Remember, I told you Whit Weeks was a 71.7. So understand the disparity. The only starter on either side of the ball for LSU, the only starter on either side of the ball with a lower grade was Jordan Gilbert, who had a 53.2. And by the way, Jordan Gilbert was playing with one arm. Remember, he dislocated his shoulder. He wore a sleeve the rest of the season, like a sling, a harness, and basically played with one arm, and then had shoulder surgery this offseason. So hopefully Gilbert's healthy and we could see who he could actually be. But the point is, Burns was a liability at star. You're going to go from Major Burns to Harold Perkins at that position. Like, remember, just for more context, Deshaun Spears was a true freshman. He had a PFF grade of 61.6. Burns was a 57.5. Spears was at 61.6. He got benched. Kylan Jackson was at 66.5, and he transferred. Couldn't get on the field. So the point being, like, there is a ton of room for improvement at one of the most important positions in Blake Baker's defense, and you have a guy that is an all-American talent moving into that role. You are potentially, for all the talk about Patrick Payton and Jack Pyburn and Mansour Delane and Tamarcus Cooley and A.J. Halsey and Bernard Gooden and all the guys they've added, and I think all those guys have potential to be super impactful players. Sadir Mitchell, none of them is Harold Perkins. And if you're adding a healthy, motivated Harold Perkins who can return to form in his natural position, where you will be dramatically upgrading that position from a year ago, that might very well be the most impactful addition for LSU on either side of the ball in 2025. And it could be a thing that helps LSU get into the playoff and have Harold Perkins on the postseason award watch list, which is far more meaningful than being on the preseason award watch list. So LSU opening fall camp, I have 4 storylines that I'm watching when LSU hits the practice field. I'll tell you what they are when we come back. It's Locked on LSU, your team every day. Love telling you about our friends over at 5 Hour Energy because I've been a 5 Hour Energy user for quite some time now. And it is time to fuel up and turn it up with 5 Hour Energy Transfusion. It brings the bold grape, ginger, and lime flavor of your favorite golf drink, minus the alcohol, into a quick, energizing shot. Whether you're sinking birdies or just making memories with friends, this one's a hole-in-one for your energy game. And let's be honest, some days on the course or off of it, you just need an extra boost to stay sharp and energized. Listen, we've all been there before. You want to turn 18 into 36. Maybe you're just not feeling it when you make the turn and you want to finish that round strong. Golf, it's all about good times with good people and good flavors, of course. So the grape ginger lime flavor gives you the best part of your clubhouse to go without chasing down the beverage cart. So make sure you check out our friends over at 5 Hour Energy. If you go to 5hourenergy.com, that's the number 5, 5hourenergy.com, you can use my promo code LOCKEDONGOLF to receive 20% off your order. This offer is only valid until September 30th on one order and cannot be used with other promotions. The code is not good on subscription orders. Whether you're meeting up with friends or trying to turn 18 holes into 36, get the energizing boost you need to power through. Order transfusion-flavored 5 Hour Energy shots today. So LSU hits the practice field for Brian Kelly's 4th fall camp as the head coach of the Tigers. And I think there are 4 primary storylines that I'm going to be watching this fall camp. First and foremost, it's one that's very obvious. It's the offensive line. LSU, as we know, is replacing 4 starters and 170 combined games played among Will Campbell, Emory Jones, Miles Frazier, and Garrett Dellinger. It is a ton of experience and a ton of cohesion because those guys started together for the better part of 3 years. You're replacing them all, and I know this sounds crazy, but I think the offensive line has a better chance of improving on the interior. Let me explain. DJ Chester started 13 games for you last year, all 13 at center. DJ Chester is not a center. He does not play center. He had not played center. He played center last year out of necessity. He got great experience, but now in bringing in Braylon Moore from Virginia Tech, you've upgraded that position. You have a true center who is a veteran power force starting center who's going to move into that role, which also allows DJ Chester to move to guard. So is Braylon Moore an upgraded center over DJ Chester? Yes. Is DJ Chester at guard an upgrade over, let's say, Paul Mabenga, who started the last 5 games? Don't forget, Garrett Dellinger got hurt against A&M. Mabenga started the last 5 games of the season, and he was your lowest-rated offensive lineman. Is Chester at guard an upgrade over Mabenga? I would say yes. And at the other spot, of course, Miles Frazier's gone. Josh Thompson is in. A guy with a ton of experience both at guard and tackle. Sound familiar? He's basically Miles Frazier, who's transferring in and can play that spot for you. I like the interior of that offensive line better than the interior of the line LSU finished with a season ago. Now, at tackle, undeniably, you're weakened. You don't have Will Campbell and Emory Jones. No, there's no reality where Tyree Adams and Weston Davis immediately are as good as those 2 players. But they were both top 100 overall recruits. Weston Davis was a 5-star. Can they hold their own? That's the question. They're going to be tested immediately against Clemson with arguably the best defensive line in the country. But that's how I think the offensive line is going to line up week 1 against Clemson. That's my opinion. We saw a lot of shuffling and rotation in spring ball, but I think you didn't bring in Braylon Moore not to start him at center. Josh Thompson may play guard may play tackle if one of the guys we just talked about, Adams or Davis, really struggles. But we may not know that until they start to play football, like play actual games. Remember, Brian Kelly's first game ever, Garrett Dellinger started at center and then never went back there afterwards. So Charles Turner took the job. So a lot of this will be an evolution, and we'll see how it goes. But I think that's how they'll start. And you've got great depth there as well. Karius Kern and Solomon Thomas are 5 stars. Cohen Eccles is a dominant interior player who's the heir apparent at center. I mentioned Paul Mabenga, who got 5 starts under his belt a season ago. You got Bo Bordelon, who's been around the program. You have talent and talented depth. You just don't have a ton of experienced depth. Hopefully you don't have to find out if you're going to need it, but I think the interior of that line could be better. But how that offensive line shapes up is the number one talking point, the number one storyline in fall camp. The number 2 storyline in fall camp is the defensive equivalent of the offensive line as far as questions go, and it's the secondary. The big difference is the offensive line for LSU had 4 great players that all graduated. The secondary returns a lot of players. You were just atrocious. I mean, we talked a bit ago about the Pro Football Focus grades. Jordan Gilbert, Major Burns were your 2 lowest rated starters on the team. Now, Zy Alexander was your highest rated defensive starter. He's graduated. Sage Ryan was in that mix as well. He's at Ole Miss now. And by the way, Sage Ryan being one of your highest rated defensive players is evidence of just how bad you were in the secondary. I know that's going to come across as crass towards Sage Ryan. And I think I've been a defender of Sage Ryan because I think he was a great team guy who started his career injured and then played out of position, out of necessity during his time playing nickel, playing boundary corner out of necessity before he finally got to play his natural position last year at safety, and he had his best season. It wasn't great, but he had his best season at LSU. Anyway, when I look at what LSU has in the secondary, Ashton Stamps going into his 3rd year as a starter. Mansour Delane coming in from Virginia Tech is your best cornerback on the team. DJ Pickett, 5-star, super high ceiling. Jakeem Jackson, former 5-star transferring in from Florida. PJ Woodland is still there as well. You look at safety. Jordan Gilbert, who was a starter for you a year ago, playing with a bum shoulder, had off-season shoulder surgery. If he's healthy, he's competing for a job. Deshaun Spears, the former 5-star, a year older. AJ Halsey, Tamarcus Cooley, a couple of transfers who've got a ton of experience at high-level Power 4 games. You are undeniably more talented in the secondary. Adding Mansour Delane, DJ Pickett, Jakeem Jackson, AJ Halsey, Tamarcus Cooley, you are undeniably better. What you have none of is continuity. None of these guys have played together, except Stamps and Jordan Gilbert have shared the secondary time, but all of these guys are new. So when you're asking an entire secondary to play as one, and the first time they're going to play together is on the road at night at Clemson against Cade Klubnik and that offense, that is an unenviable task to try to play that unit to play as one in that task. But you are undeniably going to be more talented. So who wins those starting jobs? My guess as they push off from the dock is Ashton Stamps and Mansour Delane will be your starters, and DJ Pickett, PJ Woodland will rotate in along with Jakeem Jackson. A safety is far more interesting. I'll go ahead and say again, I don't think you bring in AJ Halsey and Tamarcus Cooley without the intention of starting them, but Jordan Gilbert is a guy who's played a ton of football and was a starter for you a year ago. That one could be interesting to see how the battle at safety does play out with bringing in those two. So offensive line and the secondary are my 2 biggest questions going into fall camp. I'll give you my other 2 as we wrap up next here on Locked on LSU, your team every day. You know, when LSU hits the practice field on Wednesday and throughout fall camp, the doctors and the trainers that are there caring for the LSU football student athletes, of course, are from Our Lady of the Lake. Our Lady of the Lake and LSU, championship health partners. And that great world-class care extended to the LSU student athletes is also extended to the LSU student body and is extended to everyday champions like you and me. Because at Our Lady of the Lake, part of the Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady Health System, they're expanding healthcare over their multi-state healthcare system to provide medical services in all different areas for you and me and our families. I've told you my own personal experience throughout the years with my son Drew being cared for at the Children's Hospital, at Our Lady of the Lake Children's Hospital. My own personal physician is Dr. Curtis Chastain at Our Lady of the Lake Men's Health Group. They're leading the way. You can learn more at ololrmc.com/LSU, ololrmc.com/LSU. They're shaping the future of healthcare at Our Lady of the Lake. It's Our Lady of the Lake and LSU. Together, we roar. I have two more fall camp storylines that I'll be watching when LSU hits the practice field on Wednesday and throughout fall camp. The third one is Kyle Williams in the defensive line, the interior defensive line. We probably haven't given enough credit to the job Bo Davis did a year ago. Remember, you lose Mason Smith, Mekhi Wingo, Jordan Jefferson, all to the draft. You lose 3 interior defensive linemen to the draft. And Brian Kelly, after spring ball, says defensive tackle is an absolute must. We got to go get a defensive tackle. They'd already added Gio Paez from Wisconsin. And LSU missed on a couple of high-profile defensive tackle transfers. That's when Brian Kelly very notoriously said we're not in the business of buying players. And all they added was a rotational guy from Division II Grand Valley State. It was certainly not enough. And then the guy who was your best, most experienced returning interior defensive lineman, Jacobian Guillory, going into his 5th season, ruptures his Achilles in the second game against Nichols. And so LSU had to shift. Gio Paez had to move inside. Paris Shand at 275 pounds ends up playing defensive tackle. Ahmad Bro, a high school defensive end, putting on weight to become a defensive tackle, ends up playing key snaps for you. And then your 5-star, Dom McKinley, the number 1 player in Louisiana, Dom McKinley battled a toe injury. He wasn't really ready to go until about the halfway mark of the season. The fact that Bo Davis created stability with that group is astonishing. But now Bo Davis is the coach of the New Orleans Saints, the defensive line coach with the New Orleans Saints. And Kyle Williams is the new defensive line coach at LSU. And we all love Kyle Williams as a player and as a leader in everything he was at Ruston High, at LSU, in the NFL for 13 seasons, multi-time Pro Bowler, heart and soul of the Buffalo Bills. Ask anyone that shared a locker room with him. They love Kyle Williams, but he has never coached in major college football. And LSU being your first job is a massive ask. And even more so, Kyle Williams and Bo Davis had very different approaches with how they wanted to utilize the defensive line. Just look at Sadir Mitchell. Sadir Mitchell is a 6'5", 360-pound interior defensive tackle that Bo Davis recruited to Texas and then got the transfer to LSU. The transfer that LSU added post-spring is Bernard Gooden, 6'1", 280. Kind of looks like Kyle Williams. Kyle Williams wants shorter, stockier, explosive dudes that can blow up the launch pad, whereas Bo Davis wanted enormous space eaters that would eat up blocks and free up the linebackers to go make plays. And obviously that worked with guys like Whit Weeks and Greg Penn a year ago. So you've got numbers, and you even have experience adding Bernard Gooden and Sadir Mitchell to a group that now gets Jacobian Guillory back for this season, and Ahmad Bro and Dom McKinley a year more experience. And you added 5 freshman defensive linemen. Now, one has already transferred out after spring, after Bo Davis left. But you have numbers. You have depth. You even have experience at defensive tackle. But you have a coach that has a very different expectation of the defensive tackle position than the guy that recruited most of those guys. So that's going to be one to watch, just how Kyle Williams utilizes those defensive tackles. And then my 4th storyline are 2 guys that I already mentioned, Harold Perkins, Jacobian Guillory. For all we've talked about what LSU has added in the transfer portal, Perkins may be your best defensive player. With all respect to Whit Weeks, who is outstanding, Harold Perkins at his best might be the best defensive player in the country. That's not wild to say. Think about what it was like watching Harold Perkins as a freshman in his natural habitat. He's healthy and going back there. And then think about Guillory, a 6th-year player, a strong, physical, technical interior defensive lineman who's been through the wars over 5 seasons now going into year 6. Getting Perkins and Guillory back is massive, but I also want to see if those two guys are healthy. Remember a year ago, Zy Alexander was coming off the torn ACL that he suffered against Army in the first playing date in November. And Zy Alexander ran third team throughout fall camp. And it wasn't because other guys were better. It was because he was still getting back into game shape. And it really wasn't until that South Carolina game up in Columbia where he had an interception in the back of the end zone. And then when the calendar flipped to October that he was really full speed and he became your best defensive back again because he was. But it just took him a while to get back into playing shape and game shape. So for all that Perkins and Guillory can be, it's important to remember neither of those guys has played football since September. It's been 10 months, 10 and a half months, really, since those guys have played football. How quickly can they get back into football shape? And what is realistic week 1, August the 30th at Clemson for guys that haven't played, will not have played football in nearly a calendar year by the time they tee it up and kick it off? Will they be able to give you 50, 60, 70 defensive snaps? That's going to be fascinating to watch throughout this fall camp, how those guys progress having not played football in more than a year, coming off an Achilles and an ACL. Serious injury, but serious, high-level defensive players for LSU if they're healthy and ready to roll. We stop talking about it and we start getting answers on Wednesday when LSU hits the practice field, and we'll be there and we'll be covering it every day right here on Locked On LSU. Thanks so much for making us your first listen. For your second listen, how about you go check out the Portal Show on podcast or YouTube? Of course, you can find us on your favorite podcast app. Please rate us, leave a review. If you're on YouTube, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so you're notified whenever we post a new video. And let a friend know if they love the Tigers. We got you here every single day for Locked On LSU, your team every day.